And also want to just recognize this incredible steering committee of the coalition that has just been introduced to everyone. A special shout out to the participants in this webinar conference that we're having today. And this webinar conference, as we know, is one that is titled FBI Attacked Because Black is Back. And we are talking about the history of the FBI attacks on the Black liberation movement. As many of you know, I seldom work with a written presentation. But I'm going to do that today because I think this discussion is extremely important. And I'm trying to be as clear as possible, and I'm hoping that that having written this will contribute to my search for clarity. So this is an overview. And the Black is Back Coalition was moved to hold this webinar conference on the history of the FBI's war on the African liberation movement by the violent pre-dawn multi-state FBI attacks on the constituent organization, the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement under its leadership. It is clear that these July 29, 2022 attacks reflect an increased intensity of the concerted colonial government's war against our liberation. This is happening at a moment of great crisis for the colonial system, where rivalry among the great powers converges with social fragmentation within the United States, and the global fight for life by the colonized that necessitates enhanced anti-colonial struggle. At this critical moment, it is our responsibility as a coalition to lead our movement beyond empty slogans and phrase mongering that substitute for the much needed science of revolution that discloses the profound contradictions and possibilities located within the parasitic colonial mode of production within which our struggle occurs, and that has been hidden in plain sight for centuries. The attack on the African People's Socialist Party reflects both the growing crisis of colonialism and the fact that the African liberation movement on the US domestic colonial front is achieving greater traction. It is a reflection of the perfect storm that is brewing, bringing with it the whirlwind predicted by Marcus Garvey 100 years ago. This webinar will help to demonstrate the history of the FBI in its attacks on the African liberation movement within the United States. We will see that the FBI actually cut its teeth in efforts to undermine and destroy the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of Marcus Garvey. This webinar will also expose the fact that the July 29, 2021 FBI raid on the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement was done with the very same allegations made against NAACP co-founder W.E.B. Du Bois in 1951. Ida B. Wells, Paul Robeson, William Patterson, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Hampton, Huey P. Newton, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, H. Rap Brown, and other renowned leaders of the US front of the Black liberation movement were also targets of secret political police aggression. But so too were cultural icons like Josephine Baker even, Aretha Franklin, and many others who had a mass following independent of the control of the United States colonial power were also targeted or targets of FBI intrigues. The most incessant memory within our movement of brutal and sometimes murderous FBI attacks is a notorious counterintelligence program or COINTELPRO. And while it is important to recognize the implications of the FBI counterintelligence program that misidentified our anti-colonial organizations, and this intentional misidentification of our anti-colonial organizations as Black nationalist hate groups, and to remember that the FBI was said to claim that the Black Panther Party was the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States since the US Civil War, it is equally important for us to understand that Black freedom Black freedom has always been illegal within the United States, and that various instruments of US colonial state power were always utilized to crush our freedom efforts. It didn't begin with the FBI or the Black Panther Party. It began with the founding of the United States as a settler colony, as an export of European empire to shores beyond Europe, as part of the process of creating the colonial mode of production that envelops the world. Following Portugal's attack on Africa some 600 years ago, and the colonial slave process that connected the world into a single economy for the first time in history, and with it, the necessary state apparatus to protect the mode of production and the colonial relations of production that defined it. The capitalist state was distinguished from prior states of what was to become Europe by the fact that it came into existence for the purpose of maintaining the status quo of colonial mode of production as its foundation. Marx misidentified this colonial mode of production by calling it the primitive accumulation of capital, the foundation of the economic process from which Europe and European self-consciousness were created. The US settler colony automatically criminalized the indigenous from whom the land and resources necessary for capitalist production were forcibly expropriated. The settlers quickly and necessarily criminalized the colonially enslaved Africans who became first commodities and first workers, upon whose whip-scarred backs capitalist production rested uneasily. Ordinary settlers became whites in this process, and through this conferred citizenship were automatically deputized as slave catchers, the genesis of the police and popular manifestation of the colonial state that even reveals itself today in various iterations within the United States and the colonial mode of production globally. Within the colonial mode of production, anti-colonial resistance is necessarily made illegal by the colonizer, whose very existence as colonizer requires the parasitic domination of the colonized. While it appears untrue that Harriet Tubman ever made such a statement, it is nevertheless conceptually significant that she is alleged to have stated the capability of bringing even more enslaved Africans to freedom within the US if only we knew we were enslaved. The success of the US military defeat of the anti-colonial Black Revolution of the 60s resulted from a counterinsurgency that included an assault on the ideas of the revolution, on developing revolutionary anti-colonial theory throughout Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and within the United States. Malcolm X, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Che Guevara, Robert Sobukwe, Amilcar Cabral ad infinitum. Subsequent to the military defeat of our revolution of the 60s, the struggle became one defined not to overturn the colonial relationship that enchained us as Africans, but to moderate it, to make it more accommodating, especially for the aspiring neo-colonial African petty bourgeoisie. Reform became more than a tactical vehicle toward total liberation, but an end unto itself. The demand for Black power morphed into the whimpering complaint that Black lives matter. A movement that sacrifices the long-term interests of the suffering working class masses for immediate reformist advantage for the African petty bourgeoisie is the definition of opportunism. The opportunism that has enchained our struggle more firmly than the bondage of physical slavery, especially since the military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s. COINTELPRO was real, but it was only the name given to one iteration of organized colonial state power designed to prevent our people from achieving the aims the concocted quote by Harriet Tubman declared to be possible. We must reattain our status in the human family as a free, dignified, self-governing people. And all our political work must be designed to negate the colonial power that holds sway over every aspect of our lives, politically, economically, socially, culturally, etc. It is the work of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement to achieve these aims that the FBI understood to be criminal, not because the work broke any laws except those inferred by colonialism that prohibits challenges, even legal challenges, to the foreign and alien colonial power violently imposed and maintained over our lives. The work done by the African People's Socialist Party to build the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations was our contribution to provide ideological coherence to our movement, provide organizational unity, and to massify our understanding that all our political efforts must contribute to a united trajectory towards self-determination and an end to the humiliating colonial domination that defines every aspect of our lives and threatens to do so for generations of African people yet unborn. These are some of the understandings that must result from this important webinar during this time of imperialist crisis, where the colonizer and his chief hegemon are pushing the world toward the potential of nuclear annihilation through wars, threats of wars, and increasingly desperate great power rivalry. Moreover, it was the colonial mode of production born of and extending from the enslavement of Africa that initiated the great climate crisis, destroying the ice caps and natural heating and cooling processes of the planet. Indeed, it is the colonial movement that is the true environmental movement, another task imposed on the backs of the oppressed who have been thrust into this parasitic, life-sucking colonial mode of production. This webinar conference is designed to alert our movement and people to the machinations of the US domestic political police known as the FBI, and to reinitiate a process of educating and informing our movement of how best to protect ourselves while advancing toward the inevitable liberation necessary for life of our people and the peoples of the world. The last great era of pronounced anti-colonial struggle, the one that the massive arrests, murders, and coups were designed to crush, the one that resulted in global colonial murder and mayhem, also resulted in the rise of armies of the oppressed that represent the highest expression of repressed humanity determined to be liberated. This was what the colonizer was intent on defeating with the military assault on the Black Revolution of the 60s. This is the meaning of Sundiata Acoli, Herman Bell, Ruchell Magee, Assata Shakur, Herman Ferguson, Mutula Shakur, Afundi Malik, Marilyn Buck, Leonard Peltier, Jan Lyman, Desi Woods, Ralph Featherstone, William Che Payne, Sophia Bukhari, Mark Essex, and a host of others too extensive to name. This is also the meaning of our Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. Together, we all constitute the bitter harvest sown by the inestimable rain of historical violence, terror, murder, brutality, and humiliation we have endured as a people whose life and future have been locked in an unending struggle for liberation. Our people and struggle, our very life efforts will always be illegal under this system. This is why we must struggle for ourselves, for the future of our Africa and our people and the peoples of the world. Uhuru, izwe letu I Afrika.